بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the Balagh Academy webinar on COVID-19 vaccinations, or shall I say the controversy around the COVID-19 vaccinations. Now, before I begin this particular webinar, there's a couple of things that I need to clarify, and then inshallah we can get straight into the actual presentations. We have a short presentation by Dr. Mohammed Munir. And then after that, we will have a Q&A panel discussion. So some of these questions are probably some of the most important questions that people do ask related to COVID-19 vaccinations in particular, but also there's a general sort of overview around COVID-19 in itself. And then in addition to that, what we'll have is for the last sort of 20 minutes, even 30 minutes possibly, we will open up questions to yourselves, the viewers. So you'll have the opportunity to ask any additional questions. Hopefully most of them will already have been addressed because some of these questions are chosen very carefully to address the main concerns that people have. Now, before I begin, there's a couple of things I really want to say and sort of highlight predominantly because these are very important things, okay? So we are going to address the issue of COVID-19. There's many, many different webinars that are out there at the moment. But the unique feature of what we want to do in this particular webinar is give the Islamic stance or the Islamic perspective to the issues around COVID-19 and more in particular, the COVID-19 vaccines. Okay, so that's the main feature today. Now, before I begin that, there is something that we should always remember. There is a qaida within the Holy Quran. So there's a kind of a principle in the Holy Quran which clearly states and makes it very clear for us. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, all those who believe, if a fasiq, somebody who's sinner, somebody who's not upright, somebody who's not adil, comes to you with some news of his, then get it clarified. Now this is a qaida in the Holy Quran. And then there is another qaida in the Holy Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ ذِكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And this is another very important qaida, is ask those people, the Ahl Dhikr. And Ahl Dhikr, there is a slight difference of opinion in terms of who they are, but the majority of people agree that this is referring to the ulama of knowledge and interest and expertise within this particular area. So ask those people who have expertise, especially of the Sharia, as well as the additional sciences that are required for you to understand the situation in general. Ask them if you do not know. So these are two qaidas that are found in the Holy Quran that we're going to take a particular focus and attention to. So for that reason, before I continue, there is one other very, very important thing that I'm going to make sure, which is very, very clear for the viewers in particular. For somebody who's been involved in this, and I'm hearing all sorts of wonderful arguments and discussions and debates out there, let's get the parameters right here. Okay, so what is this Balagh webinar going to be about? Now we have two extremes. We have one extreme, which is completely anti-vax. They are not interested in vaccinations altogether. They feel there's some kind of either conspiracy or they are some of the most dangerous things that we have in terms of what science has created in the real world today. Okay, so we're not interested in that group because they have their own understanding. They're not open to any kind of proof or discussion. They've already made their mind up. So this webinar does not address those kind of individuals. Okay, the other end, we have those individuals who are what we say, sami'na wa ata'na. Whatever we hear, we follow. So that group, again, these are individuals who basically, if science tells us, then we will accept it. So that's the other end of the spectrum. So that group of people, they've already made their mind up as well. So we're interested in that middle group of people, those people who truly want to know the reality, as much as we possibly can know, about the vaccinations, okay, and about COVID. So we're interested in that particular group of people. And before I continue, I just want to emphasize something that's very, very important. And this is something that I clearly want to put straight. We need to distinguish between real conspiracies and a conspiracy theory. We need to make sure that we distinguish between the two. Let me just very briefly explain, because people do believe in real conspiracies, okay? And that's acceptable. And then there are those people who believe in conspiracy theories, which can be questionable. So let me differentiate between the two types of people. There are those people who believe in conventional thinking, okay? So conventional thinking meaning that you have a healthy skepticism. So you have a healthy sense of being skeptical about what's out there. That is something which the verse of the Quran refers to. إِن جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. That's very clear. The Quran says that if somebody comes to you and clearly you know that they're not adil, they're not upright in their character, and you are not too sure about whether you can trust them, then get that information clarified. So clearly, healthy skepticism is something which is encouraged in Islam. The second thing is, and this is very important, that they are responsive to evidence. If there is proof and there is evidence there, they are clearly responsive to that. They will realize and appreciate that I'm asking somebody who has some expertise in the area. They are also somebody who is trustworthy, they're upright in their character, they are accountable to the community. Then those are the kind of people they would ask, and then they will get their proof, because we cannot possibly know every little detail about everything. Okay, now finally, the last thing is that there is coherence, and this is really important, that there is coherence in what you are believing. In other words, you don't accept one particular understanding and coherence in one area, yet that contradicts some other belief that you have. So it has to be very coherent. The proof that's provided must fit a general understanding that is coherent. Now, people who believe in conspirational in thinking, i.e. believe in all sorts of conspiracy theories, they fall into three traps. The first is they have overriding suspicion. Their suspicion goes beyond the norm, okay? They go well beyond their understanding of something which you would think, a bit far-fetched, okay, to some degree. Or they may also have an over-interpretation of evidence. So what they do is they'll introduce evidence to you from probably sources which are not even expert sources, only because it supports their argument. And they will over-interpret just to put a point forward. And finally, they are contradictory. They are not coherent, because what they do is they will apply this form of conspiracy to one thing, yet will not allow for that to encroach on another concept, which they have a certain alternate bias to. So for that reason, there is some lack of serious coherence there. So these are things that we need to be careful about when we get our information and knowledge. So we accept that there have been real conspiracies out there. And let me give you 1 or 2, 3 examples. There's been the conspiracy, for example, Volkswagen conspired to cheat emissions tests for their diesel engines. Number 2, the US National Security Agency secretly spied on civilian internet users. Number 3, the tobacco industry deceived the public about harmful health effects of smoking. So there are certain level of conspiracy that is out there, which is real and it's acceptable. But we need to follow a systematic way and approach to understand this. So if you are one of those two extremes, so the far right or the far left, then I'm afraid this webinar is not for you. But those of you who truly want to know and you want to gain a good understanding of what's going on, then inshallah you will really benefit from this. And all we want to do is we want to inform you so that you have an informed choice, you have the understanding and knowledge, and then now it's down to you to make your decision. So without further ado, I'm going to first make reference to our first panelist who's done a fantastic piece of work, and he's going around. Now, before I begin to introduce him, like I said before, so this is Dr. Mohammed Munir. Now, Dr. Mohammed Munir is what we would consider, I consider, as a Muslim scientist. Okay. Now, our Islamic tradition talks about Muslim scientists, how they've really contributed to the world or the Islamic world in many different ways and benefited non-Muslims all over the world. So I would categorize Dr. Mohammed Munir in that category for 2 reasons. Number 1, I see him as somebody who's very upright and just. Okay, because from my understanding of the work that he does and what he says is very coherent to me. Okay, and I have no one who has said anything contrary to that in terms of his character. Number 2, one other thing that provides me some kind of support that Dr. Mohammed Munir is the ideal person to bring to the forefront here, and as one of our panelists, is this particular individual. He engages with the ulama. he sits with groups of ulama and he explains to them, and he sits in that. So he has a very good a reputation and understanding of how the ulama work in that sense. So for that reason, he is somebody who has an expert understanding about this subject. He's a virologist from Lancaster University, and he has a specific specialist interest on the COVID vaccines and the virology and the pathobiology of viruses related to COVID and various other sort of disease conditions. So before I go further on, we're going to begin first by Dr. Mohammed Munir. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Munir, for joining us, inshallah. We'll just try to get you off mute, inshallah. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. Thank you. Thank you very much for very nice introduction. I really was intrigued by that. Thank you very much for using wonderful words. I really appreciate that. And I would like to...
We're gonna get you to put on your presentation, and first of all, give us in the next sort of 20 minutes a lowdown of what this vaccine or what these vaccines are all about, inshallah. So
absolutely. Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for the introduction, and also for the invitation to give me opportunity to really get through some of the details about COVID-19 vaccine. So there is a very simple agenda here. What I wanted to bring is really the realities, and also we'll try to put forward some of the key realities so that you can make your informed decision. To begin with, as Rafaqat was mentioning, I just wanted to put my research over there just to give you an idea what kind of involvement of my group is with the SARS-2. We have developed the COVID-19 vaccine, which is one of the very few intranasal vaccines. We have completed the preclinical studies, and we're moving into phase 1 and phase 2 trial hopefully soon. And hopefully by the mid of next year, we will be bringing good news about that. That is, of course, recognized by the World Health Organization. And because of this and other reasons, I sit into the WHO expert panel onto animal models and the vaccines. So that is about the vaccine itself. And then recently, we have also developed artificial intelligence guided smart diagnostic platform that can identify COVID-19 within 30 minutes. And last month, we got MHRA approval. That means it can be legitimately commercialized, not only in the UK, but around the globe. The purpose to show you this slide is that I am involved with the COVID-19 at the time when its name was not even identified back in December last year. So, and my lab is one of the very few labs that work with COVID-19 virus itself, authentic virus in the lab. So all I will be saying is based on my personal experience working with viruses, and that's what we do on a routinely basis. Just to put into the perspective, all the viruses, COVID-19 causing viruses, SARS-2 causing infection in the whole world can be accommodated on the top of a spoon, on a tablespoon. Okay, and my lab, we have around 2 liters of that virus. So that is kind of environment we work with. Agenda is very simple. I just want to put my timer on just to not to get on. Agenda is very simple. Well, I wanted to give you evidence-based information about why we need COVID-19 vaccines. Okay, that would be just around 4 to 5 minutes. And then I will go into some of the common myths and factual responses. That will take around 12, 13 minutes. And that I will make sure that I will end within 20 minutes. So let me begin with emphasizing the fact that vaccines have been critical in eradicating common diseases. And the data I will be showing here is based on the United States, because United States is pretty proactive in providing the data on a real-time basis. So in every year of the last century, we have had 500,000 measles cases. We have same number around 250,000 about pertussis, mumps, rubella, smallpox, diphtheria, polio, anything that you can think of around the highly infectious viral or bacterial infection. So that's really big number. I mean, back in 20th century, somebody knows somebody who has a polio. Okay, and I know one of my cousin have the polio that is around 60 years old cousin. But that isn't really the case now. I mean, since the introduction of the vaccines, for example, if we look onto the figure of 2019, we have only 1,200 cases compared to 500,000 last year. So that is really what we are looking about, the impact of those vaccine in reducing the number and reducing the number significantly. For example, if you look now and ask yourself that, do you know anybody in this generation who has a paralytic polio? It's a deadly disease. Okay, but you wouldn't be able to find that, is because we have had vaccine and the history of the vaccine to reduce. And all of those diseases have been reduced significantly, over 90% reduction within very few years of repeated vaccination campaigns. So that is really to emphasize the fact why vaccines are so important. I want to give you a context here, because the flu jab is something that we probably come across routinely. I mean, on a yearly basis, we are vaccinated in one or other way. With the flu vaccine, we don't really have a great success. And one of the primary reasons is just because the virus itself is very complicated. It has a segmented genome and it comes up every time in a new version. So therefore, the vaccine success has been variable. So this is a every year's figure. Okay, from 19 to 60% is the success rate in last 10 years. So basically what we have been talking about, the flu vaccine, that is only effective about 50 to 60%, right? But when we talk about the COVID-19 vaccine, particularly focusing on the Pfizer and BioNTech, we are talking about 95% efficacy. So that is significantly higher than the flu. So if the flu jab can be administered to protect against this infection, certainly the COVID-19 vaccine has a scope to do so. Another thing that I would like to quickly highlight is that HIV is a big problem. I mean, it's for last 10 years, it has been declining significantly because of the awareness campaigns and so on. But if we look onto the figure that has been in the UK, for instance, the COVID-19 has caused 63,000 deaths only in the UK. Okay, and the same number is not too variable in, for example, in the United States is significantly higher. So these 63,000 people who have died with the COVID-19, this is more than 20 years that's caused by HIV, AIDS altogether. So that is what we are talking about, the scale of this disease and the importance to have some sort of pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical intervention, because without that, this trend will continue and that would be devastating. Just to put into one of the perspective, I would like to put one real case scenario here. Some people think that, oh yeah, well, that is an infection that can go by itself. So therefore we don't need the vaccine. So here is one scenario that was in main US. What happened, there was a wedding ceremony, 55 people participated, only one was the one that was infected. What happened, that person has infected another 177 people, the one who participated into the wedding, and also once they return back to the family members and so on. And what ultimately happened is that 7 out of those 77 people died. And these seven people who have died were not the one who has actually participated into this wedding ceremony, right? So that is the scale we are talking about, and that is the importance we have to refer when we put into the perspective of the vaccine. So one person infected led to deaths in the 7 people, and those were not the one who participated into the wedding itself. So just to put into the perspective, for instance, if you would have participated in here, you are young, you are healthy, you probably won't get severely sick or not hospitalized. But when you come back to your family, there might be people who are having vulnerabilities, and that vulnerability led to the unfortunate casualty. So that is what we have to keep in mind when we make the decision about the vaccine and its importance. But probably for me, coming from a very mediocre family background, for me, the most important really is not the life, it's the livelihood. Life, of course, is critically important, but we do know that over the course of this pandemic, we have saved so many lives by improved therapeutics, by early identification, by understanding the impact. But just look on to the unemployment rate that has been up just because of this crisis. So here is the figures from the US, but that is not exception with any other country as well. Like in the hospitality, we have like 40% unemployment rate just because of the COVID-19 within 1 year. And more importantly, there is one important survey that has been conducted to ask the people for how many months they can live if they are not employed. You can believe that there are 35% people, 35 out of 100 people you ask, they cannot live more than 1 month on their own saving. if they get unemployed. So you can see the impact of this unemployment caused by the COVID-19 crisis onto the livelihood, because not just the livelihood is equally important. So the last bit I want to add about here is the herd immunity. So if we look onto the figure of the herd immunity now, we are having around 20% of the people in the world that are infected, and then they recovered, they are having some level of protection against the virus. So if we keep this trend the same way, we got 20% in 1 year, that means to reach 60%, we need another 2.5 or 3 years. And if we keep that trend, that is probably too devastating. We are losing, we already lost 1.7 million people. So if we carry on doing that every year, that's going to be very complicated. So here is like 20%, which we are at the end of December or early January 2021. And if this trend continue, and this continuation can only be achieved if we would have increased vaccination. So more vaccination means lower number of infections and higher and quicker achievement of the herd immunity. So basically, if we start vaccinating the way we are planning in there, by end of next year, we will be achieving 60 to 65% herd immunity. And that is the time when we will be really sure that we will break the transmission chain of this infection, and we will be able to protect the vulnerable communities and really curtail this pandemic. So to achieve this herd immunity, vaccine is pretty critical, because if we're going to go through the natural course of infection, that's going to take another 3 years. And then we don't know if the first year immunity is still there or it's gone. So we got to recycle again and again. So just to put into the perspective of the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine, that it required 3 weeks interval from first dose to another dose, and after the second dose, another 7 days are required to have established immunity. But I would like to emphasize here is that, of course, vaccines are not the magic bullets, and these are not the only source of curtailing this pandemic, but these are very powerful tools. But we don't really know that whether this vaccine, the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, would be able to protect you from getting the infection or transmitting the infection. And people probably need to self-isolate and have to do the quarantine and so on. But that is really certainly something that we are counting very high at the moment, because it can save lives quite significantly. So that is just to summarize the immunity caused by these 2 vaccines, Pfizer BioNTech and as well as Moderna. So both are almost at the same scale. So the vaccines that we are talking about is not just about a couple of people vaccinated or protecting the vulnerable community. If we really want to curtail this pandemic, we have to have 75% of the population in a country, in a continent, or in the global level to be immunized. And for that, we need 13 billion doses. And that is a massive task, a gigantic task. We never practice this kind of vaccine into the human living history. But that is really the start. I mean, if we keep moving the way we are doing now, with the rolling out of the vaccine with 1, 2, 3, and 4, we will be ultimately reaching to that herd immunity level. So now, in the last 5-6 minutes, what I will be doing is to go through a few of the more important points that I have gathered based on my experience in the media, or based on my experience with communicating with the people. What are really the main questions? Can we address them through the scientific backing? And if so, we will be providing the public an informed choice for them to make the decision. But I would like to emphasize one thing here before I go into the detail, is that my enthusiasm should not be taken as a mandate. So I will be providing all evidences that I can think are right, and I'll leave you to make the decision, whatever you want to make about your vaccine uptake or not. Okay. So my enthusiasm is really high, because that is what I work on a daily basis. And I do critically look on to more scientifically, and also on a human perspective, on an ethical perspective as well. So let me take you very briefly on each of this point. The first question that almost everybody asks is about whether the vaccine can integrate the vaccine component into our genome, and that part can be used to either collect biometrics, to track people, or to get some information that otherwise cannot be acquired. It is true. I can tell you that there is a possibility that you can impregnate the chips into the genome, but not through the vaccine. But before I go into the scientific rationale, I would like to tell you that human surveillance can be done by many other means, which are much cheaper, much economical, and probably already prevalent. So they don't need to do really the integration of the vaccine component or any of other thing into our genome to track us. Okay, and it's not in the favor of, to be honest, in the pharmaceutical, because they are already struggling getting the trust and confidence. But that is certainly relevant when we talk about 3 of the vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. How it is relevant is that, let me put it into relatively simple terms. So our whole body is composed of different cells. And if we look onto one of the cell, our DNA is within that nucleus, it's complete packed within the nucleus. So anything that is related to DNA has to be in the nucleus. DNA cannot come into the cytoplasm, which is outer side of the nucleus in the cell. Right. So in the cytoplasm, it's only the mRNA, which is a messenger RNA, which encode for some of the proteins, and those proteins make our daily life and building block of the body. When we talk about the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, they are based on mRNA, messenger RNA. Okay, so they are injected into the intramuscular route, they go into the cells, and within the cells, they're very short-lived, because RNA itself is very unstable, 3 to 4 days gone, destroyed by our clearing mechanism of our body. And that is not only the mRNA that is injected. Our own mRNA will also be degraded within 4 to 5 days through a natural clearing mechanisms. And also this RNA doesn't go into the nucleus. So anything that doesn't go into the nucleus cannot be incorporated into our chromosome or into our DNA, right? And also RNA is a different molecule, DNA is a different molecule. So RNA has no compatibility with the DNA, and DNA is our genome, right? So RNA has to be first converted into DNA, and then DNA would be integrated into our body. But that no mechanism is existing in our body. So all in all, the RNA injected in our body through a vaccine developed by Pfizer or Moderna cannot be integrated into our genome. To put it into the perspective of the AstraZeneca vaccine, because that is also in the front runner, that is a little more different. If they would not use the non-replicating version of the vector, which they are using as a carrier of the antigen, then it could go into the nucleus and could incorporate into the genome. But they are using a virus that is not replicating. So it does not go, so when it enters into our body, it does not replicate. If it does not replicate, it can't go into the nucleus. It will only be ectopic expression, meaning that it is only in the cytoplasm. So anything that is in the cytoplasm cannot go. So ultimate, what I wanted to say is that if anything is not integrated into our genome, it would be very short-lived. Within 4 to 5 days, it's gone. One of the things that is very important is that the vaccines are made up onto aborted fetus or onto the cells. Those are derived from the fetus. Let me tell you very honestly, viruses, they do need cells to replicate. They cannot replicate on their own. They have to invade living organisms, then they make more copy of their own. Bacteria don't need to. Bacteria can multiply themselves, but viruses have to replicate onto some sort of media to make more copies of it. And that's how we make the vaccines. So the vector that we use for making the vaccine has to be onto some kind of cells. And what kind of those cells are? Some of those cells being, of course, derived from the fetus, those being aborted back in 70s and 80s. But those were not aborted just for the sake of vaccine development. Okay, and those cell lines, the media where the virus vector grow, those have been adopted so much and there's been modified so much. Even, for example, the one that is being used in AstraZeneca vaccine, that is completely changed. It's not exactly the same thing as it was in the aborted fetus. So I'm not talking about the religious side, I'm talking about the scientific perspective. It has lost its originality, and that was not just because of the vaccine production. Right, so putting into the perspective of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, the mRNA is purely synthetic. So there is no cell culture involved. There is no fetus questions. There is no any source of the material that come from animal or from the human. So it's a purely synthetic vaccine. So that is applicable for halal, applicable for vegetarian, for everybody they think of, because it's purely synthetic. The AstraZeneca one, it certainly need to grow, as I mentioned, the vector need to grow onto some sort of cells. The embryonic cell, the fetus cell, these are the cells that allow the virus to replicate more and more. But the important point to understand here is that when they are grown into the cell culture, you make like liters of those, and then afterward you need to purify the virus. So you spin them down, you purify that, and then get rid of all those cells that people think that have originally come from the fetuses. So basically the vaccine that is going into my arm or your arm or will go into our arms will not have those cells. So it would be only the attenuated virus particle that will go into our body and train our immune system. So just to quickly wrap up on 3 points altogether. So there's a question raised about that some of the vaccines, they contain some objectionable components like gelatin, which could be pork origin, or they can contain formaldehyde, they can contain mercury, they can have some other micronutrient that are hazardous for our body. One thing I would like to highlight that the amount of these molecules or these compounds like formaldehyde or the mercury or any of those components, they are first at the same level as our body's own production capabilities. Secondly, they are at the level that is already tested and validated as not hazardous to the body. But when it comes to the gelatin, it's certainly true. For example, gelatin is used for stabilizing the viruses. So it could be extremely important for the stability and efficacy of the vaccine, but that is not applicable for any of the vaccines. So there is no any pork origin gelatin or so within any of these 3 vaccines. Some vaccines can be genetically modified. Yes, absolutely, we can use, because, well, that is the reality. When we make the viruses, recombinant viruses to make the vaccine, we have to go through the genetic modification, because without that, there is no possibility. Because the SARS virus gene is getting into some of those genes that are not naturally carrying those components. So we have to make that. And to be honest, genetic modification is something that we can't live without. From banana to the strawberry to corn, whatever we are eating, some component of genetic modification is already there. And as I said, the mRNA vaccine is purely synthetic. There's no involvement of human and animal sources. It is considered halal, and it's considered suitable for the vegetarian. And that is what is really the nature of the mRNA vaccines. Just last 2 points. Some of the people are claiming that, okay, at one end, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca say that vaccine is very effective, is safe, you without any hesitation, you can go ahead and get the vaccinated. But at the same time, they are applying different governments for indemnity. That means that they have to be protected. I just want to put perspective, because I work very closely with many of the industry partners. But one thing, just to put as a claimer, I don't have any interest in any of the private company, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, or anything. What I'm saying is independent statement, is that vaccine industry hasn't been a very profitable industry. It's probably, this is the first time when the vaccine industry is seeing a major influx of the revenue. Problem has been that if anything directly or indirectly been associated any damage to the vaccine, that is onto the liability of the vaccine pharmaceuticals, the producer of the vaccine. For them, it hasn't been a great success business before. That means that they have to pay all of that liability. To protect them and to allow the pharmaceutical to come into the countries, many countries came up with the Vaccine Damages Payment Act. For example, in the US in 1979, it was introduced. That means if anybody is having any permanent disability or severe disability, they will be paid for 120,000 one-off payment. And this is an enormous amount of money. For example, in the last 40 years, UK has paid 80 million pounds in terms of compensation. And that is not just to emphasize onto the fact that the vaccines are not safe, it's just because government wanted the pharmaceutical to come and do the business. The second last point is about the vaccine is being rushed. Okay, let me put into the perspective that we do need definitely an exhaustive validation. And that's what we've been doing for any of the vaccines I showed in my first slide, that those are very success stories, that we have eliminated almost those diseases just because of the vaccines. But this time in COVID-19 perspective, there has been something very special. And that special is that we have had the first coronavirus pandemics back in 2002, 2003 with SARS, which we call classical SARS. And then in 2013, MERS, both of them have been the coronaviruses. Out of that, in last 17 years, we have gathered enough information that what are really the targets, how we can build the vaccines, what are the best suitable vaccine candidates. So basically, we can say that, okay, vaccine has been developed in 1 year, but basically that has been based on our knowledge that we gathered for the last 17 years, right? So it's basically we managed to repurpose those existing technologies against coronavirus very quickly. And there has been unprecedented need, and that is the reason that many of the bureaucratic and political interference has been ameliorated. And just to put into the perspective, when the COVID-19 started, I applied for the government to allow me to work on to the SARS-2. And it took literally 3 weeks for me to set up the containment level 3 facility, which otherwise would take 3 years to establish that laboratory. So because of this unprecedented need, the time has, and basically this is, I always say that it's not cutting the corner, it's basically been cutting the rubbish, cutting the, the bullshit around that. Okay, so another thing happened that this time, probably for the first time, that instead of performing those phase 1, 2, and 3 trials in sequential order from 1, 2, and 3, we have run them in parallel. That allowed us to collect the data relatively shorter time. Okay, but number of people, those have been tested in COVID-19 vaccines are more than actually the one that we would test otherwise in another vaccines, right? So altogether, involvement of the funds, collaboration between the pharmaceutical, between the government, all together have helped to really develop this vaccine relatively quickly. So it's not about cutting the corner, it's around cutting the crap. Right, so the last point I would just like to add is that some people say that, okay, mRNA-based vaccines are new technologies, so therefore we don't have a long-term safety data. I completely agree with that. We don't have massive amount of data. However, one thing I would like to emphasize is that the mRNA technology itself has been in the scientific community for the last 20 years. Okay, so the first mRNA-based vaccine went into the human arms in 2013. All right, so that is at least 7, 8 years of experience we have had with any of those trials. And not only just 2013, every year almost we have had one vaccine going into the human arm. So you can check all of these details about like how many people, how many different viruses being used for. So it has certainly some level of at least the short-term safety profile and the safety data. Right, so that let me to take into last 2 slides, so I will be wrapping up very quickly. Reactogenicity, which in other words is this, the side effects of COVID-19 vaccine might be a little higher than the flu shot for few reasons. Okay, because of the nature of the technology, or you can say that probably we didn't manage to include all those people into phase 3 trial that would have otherwise, for example, allergies, pregnant women or young children, just because we wanted to have a vaccine that can protect the most vulnerable ones. So therefore, emphasis have been around that. But all the short-term side effects, first, they are very minor, and secondly, they are very short-lived. Okay, and most of them, they go away within 3 to 4 days. The most 1 week. After 1 week, there is no any short-term side effect. And that is what we have witnessed with 40, 30,000 people tested. But then there are long-term side effect possibility, but that is very rare possibility. I mean, 1 in 1 million. Okay, and then 1 in 1 million chance is the same. If you take your car out on the road, there is a possibility 1 in 1 million that you get accident, but you don't go outside just because of that. Because there is a 1 in 1 million possibility the plane crash onto your roof, but that doesn't happen always. So that is always there. I don't deny that, but that is really, really rare. Lastly, I want to just put everything into the context and give you a balanced overview. What is our daily risk? The daily risk is that we are having around 4,400 deaths per day, right? And that is accounted to the deaths that we are having already around 1.6 million in 1 year. And we have 71 million infections already, okay? Around, massive, massive impact. We never have had that impact anytime in the living history. But that also means that 3 people are dying every minute. So that is our risk. So that is our daily risk. But what we have in response, the availability is that we have a 95% effective vaccine, and that has been tested on 43,000 from the Pfizer case, and in Moderna, 30,000 volunteers. And all those volunteers, they are all fine with the 2 months of safety. So I'm again emphasizing onto the fact, I don't know, nobody know what will happen in the long term, but whatever happen, it would be rare event, and that's what we have to watch out, and that's what people are doing in the trial that has been conducted. But at least for the short term, we don't have any of those in these volunteers. The short-term side effects are very short-lived, within 1 week or gone. So with this one, I just want to leave a question, is that whatever I told you is about the facts, about the scientific evidence, is what I witnessed, what other people have noticed, giving you the daily risk, giving you the available choices. Choice is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jazakumullah khair. Okay, just before we go on to the panelists and start asking questions, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Munir, and we will come back to you inshallah. I recognize, first of all, that for somebody who's also been trained in fiqh and so forth, one of the very important things that our Sharia demands, in fact, is, and you'll see this, and you ask any kind of Mufti or anybody who's trained in this particular area from the Islamic tradition and science, whenever certain discussions are, or certain experience and expertise advice is required for Muslims to act upon medical advice, what it normally would state in the books of fiqh is it needs to be a tabib khadiq. Tabib khadiq wa Muslim. So somebody who is an expert Muslim doctor. So not just any doctor, but a doctor who has expertise within a particular area, somebody who's adil, who is somebody who's upright, and somebody who is a Muslim. Somebody we can trust in the sense that they are accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and also accountable to Muslims generally. Now, if you wish to take what Dr. Munir from his expertise and his experience, remember that Dr. Munir is also accountable to the community. If he's saying something and it is clearly merged with certain self-interest or conflict of interest, then he will be held accountable for that information. So he is talking with his own reputation on the line. Now, if you wish to trust him, you can trust him. If you wish not to trust him, then that's your way. That's how you want to go, then that's fine, not a problem. The question I would ask is, who are you trusting? Because clearly you are. I can't believe that any of you are absolute experts in this area, so you are clearly taking the word of somebody. Now I want to question you, who are you trusting on these details? Okay, before I continue, let me now begin with our panelists. So first of all, we have Shaykh Abu Eesa Ni'matullah. Now, let me give you a bit of background on why we've chosen Shaykh Abu Eesa Ni'matullah specifically. Number one, Shaykh Abu Eesa Ni'matullah is a Muslim traditionally trained scholar. He is also somebody who is a chair of, or vice chair of the Al-Qalam Sharia panel. So somebody who's already accountable to the community. He plays a very important role for somebody who has expertise in the Sharia. And his main focus, for those of you who don't know what Al-Qalam Sharia panel is, they focus mainly on Islamic finance, but also other fiqh and fatawa related to that. So some prominent scholars in the UK sit on that panel, and they do a lot of work in this area. Another area, another reason why we've taken Shaykh Abu Eesa Ni'matullah and brought him to our panel is because he's somebody who is a pharmacist, so clearly has some kind of understanding about the science, and also somebody who has some understanding and experience about the manufacturing of drug products and dealing with drug companies. So he's somebody, again, I would categorize in amongst those people who are, number one, accountable to the community, number two, somebody who has good Islamic understanding, number three, somebody who has good understanding of the science as well as the industry. Our next panelist is Mufti Amjad Muhammad. So Mufti Amjad Muhammad is somebody who is also a scientist. I know Mufti Amjad for some time. He's somebody who's a colleague of mine in Bradford. So he's somebody who's very held highly as somebody who was adil, trustworthy in the community, has been studying for a number of different years. And he has something he doesn't always put forward to the forefront all the time, but somebody who is a scientist. He's clearly a scientist. He's worked in the science industry for a number of years and clearly has studied, and he holds his own Darul Ifta in Bradford, as well as he is the chair of the Ifta of Wifaq al-Ulama of UK. So clearly somebody who has a lot of accountability to the community, somebody whose reputation's on the line when he makes a statement. So therefore, another person who is accountable for what he has to say. So I'm sure everything he says would be with his own internal research. And then finally, we finish up with somebody who's another very special person, Dr. Aasim Padela. Now, I've known Dr. Aasim Padela for a number of years, and any of you who know him will understand how important he is to the Muslim community when it comes to the subject of Islamic bioethics. Now, Dr. Aasim Padela has his own organization, the Initiative on Islam and Medicine, somebody who's an acute medicine doctor, also a researcher, somebody who has worked with ulama for a number of different years. If I would say there's any kind of research on Islamic bioethics, if Dr. Aasim Padela is not involved, then I would be questioning the depth of that research and to what degree that research has contributed to world progression in this particular area of bioethics. So he's a very pivotal person. Use research on anything to do with Islamic bioethics, you would be guaranteed that you'll find some kind of article by Dr. Aasim Padela on that particular subject. So he's somebody who clearly is an international expert on Islamic bioethics. So from that perspective, we've got, alhamdulillah, an excellent panel of people. So please, if you are going to ask a question, please use our Q&A, and then inshallah what we'll try to do is we'll address the appropriate questions. We recognize, I've already explained for those of you who missed the initial part of this webinar, there are those three groups of people. We're focusing on the middle. We're not concerned about those people who believe in serious conspiracy theories, nor those who are sami'na wa ata'na, believe everything we hear. So on that basis, we're dealing with those people who seriously want to learn about this whole idea. So let me first begin. We've had Dr. Mohammed Munir talk about a couple of things. So we're going to come back to Dr. Mohammed Munir in a short while. But let me start with Shaykh Abu Eesa Ni'matullah. Okay. Now, let's ask a real question here, Shaykh. As Muslims, can we trust these secular regulatory bodies and these pharmaceutical manufacturers? What is the Islamic perspective to accepting, trusting important medical advice from non-Muslim authorities, taking into consideration also even maybe the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, where he was treated by even non-Muslim doctors? So from our perspective, living in today's society, how trustworthy are they, and to what degree, from we're going to take an Islamic stance to this, should we approach this knowledge and information that we're receiving? Like, for example, what Dr. Munir has presented to us.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Jazakumullah khair. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum again, everybody, to my respected panelists, to everybody tuning in, and jazakallah khair to Dr. Muhammad for his presentation. The reason that this question has become, for me personally, interesting, because actually it shouldn't be interesting, right? We kind of, sometimes we we kind of make things which have nothing really to do with religion, religious. And knowledge per se, in its generic sense, is knowledge. It's either, when you study, one of the interesting things when you start studying Arabic, when you start studying Islam, you have to start studying Arabic. As soon as you start studying Arabic, you are always taught right at the very beginning how to understand the concept of khabar, information. One of the interesting concepts of information is that it is either true or not true. And then you differentiate that as a statement of fact from an order. When someone gives you an order, those students will remember the original days when you study usul. Can a statement itself, in of itself, have the ability to be false or not? And one of the ways that you define a command is that it doesn't have the ability. It's information which is devoid of subjectivity. So again, information should not be politicized in that sense. It's either correct or not. And I think, unfortunately, we've allowed ourselves to kind of become a bit lazy in our own development of fiqh, and that we allowed our own Islamic kind of biases to affect information in the same way. It's very nice what actually Dr. Rafaqat said about the issue of all these panelists. They're all independent. They're all accountable to the community. Normally, we expect them to be Muslim and then to be qualified, etc., etc. That has always been our traditional line. And one of the and obviously it has many advantages because it then ensures that we get accurate and accountable information. But one of the side effects, one of the problems with this approach is that we can sometimes create unnecessary suspicion. And here, I mean unnecessary suspicion with non-Muslims or authorities which are not Islamic, for example, such as regulatory bodies, or for example, the government. What I want to put forward is that whenever you look in the books of fiqh, or maybe if you're studying a particular subject in our current time, or you're taking a fatwa that I need to go to the doctor and the doctor has to give a decision, is it okay or not to accept that decision? And it's a very controversial kind of issue, maybe to do with life support or whatever. You'll often hear the answer, as long as they're Muslim or trustworthy, and then a second one who's also got to be Muslim and trustworthy. You'll often hear this kind of line. And the reason that you're hearing the scholars say that is because they want to make sure that mistakes obviously are not, there's not some particular extreme opinion that gets missed. a second colleague, obviously fact checks, sanity check, all of that. But the Muslim part is something we have put in. It is not from our religion at its fundamentals, to absolutely insist that a person has to be Muslim to give us fatwa in this scenario. The reason that we ask for that is because we believe that person is going to be more attuned to our needs, is going to have a greater hold of the reality, but it's not a condition what we call bidhatihi, in of itself. And I think sometimes the Muslim community has now become obsessed that it needs to have an Islamic ruling here. The irony is that all of the 4 panelists that are in this call are actually irrelevant to this particular discussion. The virologist at the beginning is obviously, we have 2 qualified doctors, of course, that they have their position, but I mean, just assuming the panelists from their Islamic point of view. Actually, Dr. Muhammad is the only person who should have given this talk. He gave his points, he gave his evidences, and we should have accepted it. And we should have accepted it whether his name was Dr. Mohammed Munir or Dr. Joe Bloggs. It doesn't matter. It's knowledge that has to be weighed in of itself. So when the question is placed to us that should we have confidence and accept our regulatory bodies and our government agencies and so on and so forth, the answer should not be, and not, of course, Dr. Rafaqat was not intending that, but I want you, the audience, to understand that there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't. If they lie, then they reduce their trust in us. If they fraud us, we have no trust in them. If they speak the truth, then we have trust in them. If they speak a mixture of the truth and lies, then like every single decision that you have, you base it upon the majority. You base it upon the propensity of it to be likely, more likely. You use the evidences of normative intellectual analysis. This has not actually got an Islamic requirement. The reason I say this is because at this moment in time, I know that there's a lot of suspicion around medical, the MHRA, for example, in the UK, and the Muslims are kind of now introducing, amongst other groups, the idea that there's some big kind of conspiracy, right? It's weird that you completely accept, adore, I would go even as far as worship, yani the kufr system that you live in, the information it feeds you every day, everything which you yourself are comfortable with. But when your own personal opinion decides to go against something because it's either been, it's biased or it's been affected by whatever you're listening to or what you're seeing, somehow Muslims, the Islam card has to be played. Is it now Islamic to listen to this? Do we need further conditions? Do we need further verification? We don't need further anything. Either they are saying what they're saying is correct and the evidence supports them, or it doesn't. Whether they're Muslim or not, non-Muslim or not, whether they are authority or not, that should be kept out of the side. And so that was a long way of going around, because I always like to, when I answer a question, to explain the principles, that there's absolutely no reason for us not to trust the authorities as long as their evidence is their track record. And it goes without saying that with this vaccine trial.
Shaykh Abu Eesa, that's
yes.
Jazakallah khair. So in essence, what you're saying is that there is no real condition of them being Muslim, just that they are certain people who hold a certain responsibility in the community, have the level of expertise,
exactly,
and that would suffice us to, and then for you to make that informed decision in terms of whether you accept it or not. Now, that's fine, but let's look a bit further into this, because with any kind of organization, with any kind of regulatory body, there are certain safeguards that ensure a sense of this kind of attitude of governance, to ensure that people are not frauding or have a certain level of conflict of interest. So Dr. Aasim Padela, for somebody who is quite heavily involved in the bioethics or the Islamic bioethics of how things move and processes play, and especially somebody who's engaged with non-Muslim organizations, can we trust these regulatory bodies? Does their governance sound like something that we can have some level of trust in?
السلام عليكم. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair. So as you mentioned, and Shaykh Abu Eesa, I believe, that addressed that question, I'll just say, as a physician, right, we trust regulatory agencies in almost every decision that we make. Yeah. From the fact that I'm going to give an antibiotic, or I'm going to give something else, I am trusting a process by which medication comes to my pharmacy, or forget about medication, a tool that's used in the ER. So the idea of, well, there's one piece I don't want to take and the rest I want to take, I think is, again, a little bit illogical. And I live in the United States, and I am a researcher, and I look at the data. So I didn't want to hear about the press releases by the pharma community. I wanted to look at the data that was in the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, and see, as a methodologist who does research, whether that stood up to my own scrutiny from my expert domain, right? As a researcher who's trained in sort of in epidemiology. So I can point out there are challenges and troubles there, but the fact was that they were giving us data and then saying, let's now look at the regulatory agencies which are poring over data and looking at the releases that were there. So I think that that process occurs at every stage for almost everything that we do, and I have no reason to doubt that. Now, I will say there are gaps in knowledge, and I think our age is one where we sort of focus on gaps, right? And we are in an age where we critique and we deconstruct, but we don't focus on what is present, right? So I think Dr. Munir, may Allah bless him, did a great job saying that we know about 2 months of safety data. That's all we have. And that's a gap in knowledge. But that does not mean that we can't, we can't start thinking about, well, what do we know and what do we know from other trials and other sort of pharmaceutical development processes. So we have to, at some level, as you said, trust, but we do verify. And I think that our responsibility as physicians is to verify. People trust us and we verify. And so that's my response. That I think that the FDA here, I think there are politicized notions of what's happening there. We've seen it. Reporters have come out and said, look, there is being pressure exerted upon individuals, but those individuals are not just one person, there's multiple. And we take that institution as one that is having balances and checks. And they also actually offer public comment, which alhamdulillah exists in our countries, right? Meaning in our Western countries and sometimes not in our Muslim countries, where we can put in and have these conversations, or we don't believe the data this way, or we believe the data this way. And then they look at that and say, okay, well, I can think about it in a different way. So I believe there has been peer review, as there should be. And at the end, we're going to have to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he will not put, right, he will not put people above us and make the entire system one that is all there to make us harmed. I do not believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets this guy not in that way. And that is the ultimate trust we should have. But I do believe in the pharmaceutical companies, Dr. Rafaqat, and what Shaykh Abu Eesa said, that they are following processes. Because of the global pandemic, they've had to only use limited snapshots of the data, but that data does look reliable, and there has been an open process in looking at it.
I suppose there are two other things. For somebody who's worked as a commissioner, and clearly we recognize issues of conflict of interest, especially where finances are involved, there are quite robust governance structures that are brought into these kind of organizations, because these organizations are liable and accountable to the public. And if there anything is against the idea of interest, or there is a serious conflict of interest, those kind of things would be addressed, and the whole organization would go down on the basis of that. So even these pharmaceutical companies, even if we want to refer to them, I suppose there is a sense of accountability to them. If, okay, their incentive is solely financial, let's say, then if their vaccines came out tomorrow and they seriously harm the public, there goes that organization, there goes that manufacturer. Their reputation is complete. Nobody will ever trust them again. So there is this sense of worldly accountability that people have, if not even from an Islamic perspective. So that's an important point. Let's just move on to Mufti Amjad. So let's go on to the idea of ingredients and excipients within drugs, and in particular vaccines, because vaccines are quite different to just normal conventional drugs that we get over the counter or doctors prescribe to us. So I'm referring in particular to the impure animal substances found as ingredients or excipients in some of these vaccines, like porcine, for example. Can Muslims take such vaccines that contain these impure ingredients or excipients? Mufti Amjad.
نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم وما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاكم الله خيرا. Salam to everybody, panelists, and those who are listening. I just want to take a little step back first, if I may, and just to tackle a more general point. I noticed in your introduction, Dr. Rafaqat, you mentioned a number of caveats, treading carefully in how you pitch this discussion, because unfortunately it's very much a politicized or conspiracized conversation, especially when we get into vaccines. With numerous sort of articles and public appearances that I've made, I've received a lot of kind of correspondences and somewhat quite heated and quite emotional correspondences, more than usual, So I just wanted to touch on a few points. First, with regards to a fatwa is a snapshot of a situation which is occurring within the community. Sometimes the community are eager to say, yeah, but what's the impact of this vaccine 30 years from now, 40 years from now? Can you not take that into consideration? Unfortunately, we can't. We have the data that we have that Dr. Aasim Saab just mentioned now as well. We have to give a response based on the data that we have. So then that's one point in terms of what a fatwa is. Secondly, we seem to also conflate ethical issues with the legality of a particular matter. So when we give a fatwa about something, we're looking at its permissibility rather than, what about the pharmaceutical companies making lots of money out of this? What about certain people that will be impacted on the side effects that will occur as a result of it? And thirdly, which I guess is more important, is our role to kind of articulate the moral code that the Sharia is. We don't live in a Sharia state as such in which we can enforce anything. So this is just about bringing about informed consent or informed choices. And it's really about individuals to make that particular choice. And then I just lead on to one other point before I answer your question directly. So neither Wifaqul Ulama as an organization or neither I as an individual have recommended either this particular vaccine or any vaccines for that matter, or even further still, any type of medical intervention. As a Hanafi, we see it as something which is permissible. And that's something that that's a position we take even with this vaccine, that is a permissible intervention to take. So it's not about promotion, and it's not about anti-vaccine ulama and pro-vaccine ulama. I think, unfortunately, if we're being perceived like that, then it's something on our case that we've not really been clear in getting the information out there, or people are seeing biases in our research which don't exist. We are supposed to be approaching all forms of research with a tabula rasa. We're looking at things fairly and accurately now, and we base a decision on that. So I think that little kind of my little caveat or background, I think is important for all to take into consideration. So with regards to your specific question, Dr. Saab, there's a number of factors which obviously need to be taken into consideration. The efficacy of this vaccine or any vaccine which has animal any animal ingredients or any stabilizers or anything else for that matter, and other vaccines which may be available that don't have any illegal from a Sharia perspective ingredient in there. The underlying health issues of the individual that's being asked to take it, it's not that every human is the same. So it's not just a case of one shoe fits all or one medicine fits all. It's a case of what's the underlying health issues of this particular individual, and what would this person benefit as an individual from this particular vaccine. And then it's looking at probable outcomes, ghalib al-dhann as we understand it. What are the probable outcomes of taking this particular medicine or vaccine rather? And then we touch on the last point, which I think Dr. Munir Saab was also speaking about, which is the herd immunity or the herd immunity threshold. At what point, can we sort of say, well, you know what, we shouldn't take this vaccine or any vaccine for that matter, because of the fact that it's something which, if we don't, as long as many people do, then we'll be all right. It's about where is that threshold, and not all diseases have the same threshold. So it varies. So again, I think we, or the public, or maybe we, I don't know, or all of us, we oversimplify lots of things, and we, as the saying goes, we throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of things which need to be taken into consideration. I don't personally gain from anybody taking the vaccine or not taking the vaccine, and I'm sure that's the case also from the respectful panelists here that are also speaking. So I think that hopefully answers your question, Dr. Saab.
Okay, Shaykh Abu Eesa, Mufti Amjad talked about herd immunity. Maybe we can sort of describe herd immunity as if a certain percentage of the community have a certain immunity to a particular virus, which clearly is causing a lot of harm. There still is that skepticism, people who are still questioning COVID, whether it's actually no different to any typical virus. I mean, all you need to do is just go to your nearest Muslim graveyard, and you'll see the number of deaths that you would find at this time of year relative to this particular year in particular is quite large. You must be completely on a different planet if you don't think that it's infecting and causing deaths from that particular perspective. Anyway, so back to this point of herd immunity. The herd immunity issue sits on the idea that a certain percentage of the community are vaccinated in this sense. And if they are vaccinated, then that will be a protective factor. for the remaining people also, you know, against that particular deadly virus. So how should the Sharia see this? And this is quite a novel subject because it's not always, I mean, from my understanding, from my own study and research, it's not something that's directly related, but I suppose we talk about issues like maslaha, for example, and avoiding mafsada, and we talk about hajat al-am, and various other sort of concepts that get introduced within the subject. How should Muslims perceive this? Because if we're saying that a vaccine is permissible, we're saying it on the basis that there are no sort of haram ingredients, for example, on that. Unless it's an issue of tadawi bil muharram, whereby there are certain conditions we have to accept. There is no other alternative, for example. It's clearly proven to be effective. So Mufti Amjad talked about ghalabat al-dhann, for example, and clearly something which is easily accessible. These are certain factors that would be required of us. But when you're looking at herd immunity, and we're asking somebody who's now asking this question, and their question is, can I take a vaccine containing impure substances to benefit herd immunity and save lives when I am at the lower risk end of the spectrum? I'm young, I don't have any comorbidities. It's a difficult question, Shaykh Abu Eesa, and you don't need to answer that directly, even if you sort of give us talk around that subject. What would that be? What would the perspective be to that? I recognize we've got Pfizer, which is vegetarian, so alhamdulillah, we're very, this is a great blessing from Allah that we got a vaccination like that. Let's say we were in a situation, hypothetical situation, where that wasn't the case. How would the Sharia, or your opinion of the Sharia, how would it sort of take that sort of decision?
So on the issue of a vaccine that was impure, let's build it on that. All right,
Okay.
let's go worst case scenario. As Mufti Amjad said, right, the issue of excipients is a matter of scholarly difference. There are some that consider it to be okay, because those who would be untrained will just say, listen, it's a need, so, you know, no problem, which is obviously weak, and, you know, as weak from every angle. Then there'll be those that will consider it to be okay because actually there is no impermissible excipient, it's changed in its state, and I don't want to bore anyone with that. I think all of the speakers here will have no doubt taught about this subject and medicines and vaccines, and the audience can go and research on that. But there are those that will consider it to be, let's take again worst case scenario. I don't consider porcine derived gelatin or whatever excipient to have changed. It is there enough in a material sense to still be haram, and therefore I consider the vaccine personally to be haram. So if this is the scenario right now dealing with this, can I be obligated to take this? If so let's now go to an Islamic authority. If it's an Islamic authority, if you're living in a Muslim country, the ruler was to give the ruling, then I don't even need to get subjective about this. The Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami has already passed a fatwa on this 25, maybe 30 years ago. Okay, that was back then when the evidence was, I don't want to say poor, but the working evidence was certainly a lot less than what it is today of the impact, the importance, the political health, the financial consequences of not taking medication, especially in a pandemic. So what about now? So that's already been given a fatwa that it is obligatory to obey an authority. They were talking, of course, in a Muslim country, but I'll come to that in a second. They're obligatory to obey the authority that forces you to take a medication stroke vaccine in order to curtail a pandemic or an infection. All right. Again, this was in that era where the information isn't even to the level that we have today. That would be for something which is even impermissible, because the impermissible excipient, according to the principles of fiqh, becomes permissible even if we consider it to be impure, if there is a need, let alone a necessity. So the fatwa which is being given, if it was given, and I also want to respect Mufti Amjad for what he said, you know, us as individuals, regardless of you know, our backgrounds and whatever, it doesn't matter to us whether you take the vaccine or not. I got a call from a person that you know, I'm not going to actually forget who it was, who asked me, should I take the vaccine or not? A top scholar in this country 2 days ago. He was given it because he's frontline. He was offered it frontline. I said, yeah, if someone gives it to me, I'll take it. Certainly take this one that has absolutely no involvement with gelatin versus the ones that are going to come, and then there's going to be discussion about it. But even talking about those, if there is a need and it is established that it's going to play an essential role for herd immunity, then it is obligatory to take it. even though I consider the vaccine in of itself to not be obligatory to take, not even necessarily recommended to take. My personal fiqh position is the Hanafi position, in that it is permissible to take, no more, no less. But there is a concept of herd immunity, and not the incorrect one. You see, the problem is that when the government messes it up, royal mashup of what they did, like they've turned it into this political football that they tried to use in the early stages, and they lost the masses because they were talking about herd immunity by letting people get infected by it. And take the risk of getting killed by it yourself, not a vaccine-based one, but actual natural infection. And they called that herd immunity, messing up the concept for all of the scientists, the public losing trust. Herd immunity is meant to be something which is an active process in which you use a vaccine that's already been established in its safety profile, enough established safety, as not obviously nothing's going to be 100%, to create at that level of herd immunity. And so now people have already lost trust with the concept. Now is the time when it's meant to be applied properly according to knowledge and facts, and people are now not interested. So to reset the issue, if the question is asked, if it is established that it will establish herd immunity, that it will protect the wider community, even if you are at low risk, you're young, fit, healthy, etc., and the authorities decide to, even though of course they haven't, and they won't because it's too politically controversial, but if they were, then it wouldn't matter if they're Muslim or not Muslim, because the hukm is manut bil maslaha. The ruler that rules, and our obedience to them is not because they are Muslim. It is based upon the benefit. It is based upon the maslaha. This is a qaida fiqhiyya, which is a maxim in jurisprudence, which is well established. And so therefore, if it was given, then it would also be obligatory, hypothetically, for us to take that to save other people, not even if we're affected. Let alone people who have already been infected, by the way. I'm talking, if I'm going to make it a worst case scenario, I'll say young, fit, healthy, who's already had the infection and got some natural immunity, even that person would be obligated if the authorities said that you need to take this via herd immunity through the vaccine and its specific immune response in order to protect the weak, the elderly, and so on, if that ever happened.
Okay, Dr. Aasim Padela, I'm just going to bring you in for a short while. In response to this question that we just talked about in terms of herd immunity, I think you've got something you want to say about that. But also, I want you to sort of expand on this. For somebody who's done quite a bit of written work and research, having engaged with a number of ulama on the issue of tawakkul. And I think, even though somebody who's read into this quite considerably, and ulama always start the subject of tadawi bil muharram, they always start off with the first area, which is also the main issue of tawakkul. How does tawakkul? Is this khilaf tawakkul? Is it goes against tawakkul, or so forth? So this is where our theology comes in. I trust in Allah. I don't need to take no vaccine. I'll go to the masjid, I'll do all the wonderful things that I need to do as a worshipper, and I have tawakkul. Why am I taking these? Okay, ulama said it's permissible. Okay, they're not maybe pushing the agenda forward in terms of vaccines, but I don't want to take it. I have tawakkul. I have a higher level of iman. So, Dr. Aasim, how do we address this from an Islamic bioethical sort of perspective, or theological position on this?
Bismillah. I'll address the issue about tawakkul in a second. I just wanted to say, in contradistinction perhaps to maybe the other panelists, I will tell you I am interested in your taking a vaccine. And I think that if we say we're not interested, I think that's a little bit problematic from my perspective as a Muslim. I'm an ER physician. I wear masks all the time. I'm taking care of people. I intubated the other day as someone who had COVID-19. And I am worried about your health. I'm worried about my health. I'm worried when I work in the ER and I go home, I stay in a hotel at times. I shower. I don't take my clothes. I don't want my kids, my wife, her parents to get ill. So I think as all of us as part of the global community, we are, right? You've seen those campaigns. We are asking for us to do our utmost so we don't transmit, the disease to those who might die from it. One of my closest friends from college presently is an ICU physician. He's on ECMO, meaning he is on a machine that will oxygenate his blood. He was the frontline physician in the ICU, taking care of COVID patients for months. He was on intubated, and now we don't know if he's going to survive because he has so much infectivity risk, right? Wearing all the PPE that one can. So I'll say, and I think the panelists should also say, yeah, we are invested in people getting a vaccine because it's one part of that armamentarium of what we can do to reduce the infectivity amongst people, amongst our gatherings, right? So it is not all of it, but if it offers some protection to some people, and then we don't cause others to die from it, then I think this is actually something we should all be invested in. So I wanted to clarify that, because sometimes we're trying to say this so you don't feel that we're getting money in our pocket because you're doing something. And I think that's true. But I am invested in maslaha nas, right? I am, as a Muslim, I am, right? As a physician, I am. I want good for people, and I am interested in that. So that's one. Secondarily, and I think, Shaykh Abu Eesa, you could actually say this is haqq Allah. When maslaha is like this for everybody, this in our fiqh books we call it haqq Allah, not haqq ibad. Haqq Allah's right over people. This is what, right? So this is the point, that when you have this sort of situation, we should not be. I don't think we should be mixing words. This is a big important thing. Now, as to tawakkul, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and you all, I feel sorry I'm saying this, but you all are fuqaha and ulama, right? And Allah yuhibbul mutawakkilin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who have trust in Him, or reliance, not trust, reliance, utmost reliance. So in my reading, the idea, I think, that people say, I'm going to trust Allah and not trust people, is one that the fuqaha have extensively discussed, that there is no notion that there is a canceling out of one's trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you take the means, except for if you believe the means have anything to do, and it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's the ultimate agent behind everything, right? Allah has put the cure, He sends down disease, He's the one who gives effectivity and efficacy to anything. So unless you're canceling your aqidah there and saying, no, I believe that this water is going to quench my thirst, not Allah is, then they are, well, this is against tawakkul. But aside from that, there is no notion of that. Now, there are treatises, and in our Sufi manuals, our manuals about those, and the Hanbalis talk about this. Those who have a high level of maqam, they just trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of my teachers, I'll end with this, Shaykh Rafaqat. One of my teachers sort of talks about this exegesis in the Quran. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about, he says, Ayyub al-Hasan is quoted to say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Inni masini dur wa anta khairur rahimin. He makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That I am afflicted by harm, but you're the most merciful of mercifuls. And this has been explained in the sense that some fuqaha say that he's just asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what's best for him. He trusts that Allah, right? You're the most merciful of merciful. So if there's a cure, He will bring it down. He doesn't need the asbab. But that maqam doesn't mean that you can't take the asbab. And other mufassirin talk about actually things that happened. So my point is that for us to say I have this high maqam, we should all have a high maqam. But that does not mean canceling out what we were supposed to do. And at times, actually, I would say that we have the aduf al-iman. We're the lowest of people, right, who have iman. So I don't think in one issue we say we have a high maqam and I want to trust in Allah, and everything else I'm not. Because that is actually counter logic. And Allah has given us this logic to think about things in that way. So that's what my reading has been. But I want to be really forceful about, yes, I am interested in your taking a vaccine. I am interested in your wearing a mask. I want the best for you and mankind. And please, if you do that, perhaps you might help me and those patients in the ER.
Okay, some very powerful words there. Okay, so let's move on. There's a clear discussion that seems to be floating around about aborted fetuses, and Dr. Munir has already talked about that, and he's told us that there are no aborted fetuses in vaccines. However, there are certain vaccine vectors that are made in fetal cell lines. Now, so what that would mean is that there was originally a case of an aborted fetus where these certain cells were taken, and then these cells were then, you could say, cloned through a whole cell line. And then what we have is we have certain cultures from these cell lines, and we actually grow these vaccine vectors in there. Mufti Amjad, you've written a fatwa on, and you specifically identify this issue, and you talked a bit about this from an Islamic perspective. So we talked about sort of haram ingredients. What about using a cell line of cells that originally come from aborted fetuses? Recognizing aborted is just a sensationalized sort of approach to the whole subject, just to really get people worked up. What's your sort of stance in your fatwa regarding this?
Well, first, from a Sharia perspective, humans in general, ikramul insan, the respect of humans, the value of humans, and I'm not distinguishing between those of faith or no faith, is highly regarded. The whole creation is there to serve humans, and humans are there to serve Allah. So the human dignity, human respect, all aspects of human behavior is something which is held in high dignity and in high respect. The use of humans or the use of human parts, and I'm not going to get into a discussion on organ transplantation or anything of that nature. I guess that we can say for another day, inshallah, or if that day has already been had, I must have missed it. But putting that to one side, the use of humans is obviously looked down upon, and that's a really diluted phrase. It's impermissible without any shadow of doubt. But as I said, with those caveats and the positions some fuqaha have taken with regards to human transplantation, where I said I'm not going to get into that discussion. When it comes to human life and taking human life, then that's again a very serious matter which the Sharia condemns in very strong terms, and it's only in certain positions or scenarios where the taking of human life is permitted. And again, that's a conversation for another day. I know there's various opinions with regards to aborting a child, or and its permissibility or otherwise. I hold quite a strong position with regards to that. Even before the soul is blown in, it's a part of the woman, and it's a part of a human. And can we permit the amputation of a human just because of a decision that they choose not to have something? So does it permit, for example, a person to say, I don't like my foot anymore. Can you remove my foot? So forget whether this has become a child now. That's a separate topic altogether. And I think what happens is we focus on the rights of this child, and we forget that this is also part of the woman. It's part of her. And I know through medical interventions, we're permitted to remove cancerous parts from a human and remove parts of a human which are causing harm to the human. And then it's the kind of, ahwanu sharain, the lesser of the two harms, and all the rest of it. But let's just focus then, I felt that background was important. So that clearly you can see where my answer is going to go, that's impermissible to take any part of a human and use it for research purposes, for scientific purposes, in order to seek some kind of potential cure. When there's no guarantee that there can be a cure. However, and it is a big however, we look at the situation now, not look at the situation, say 40, 50 years ago in the 1960s and 70s when those fetuses were aborted. And in this situation now, there are not even nanograms of DNA left within these cell lines in order to be able to say that there is human element in there. It's gone through so many phases that no longer exists. So again, I say, and this is again the conflation I spoke about right at the beginning, we give a hukum on what's in front of us. We don't give a hukum on how we got here. With the fuqaha are very practically minded, and sorry to wave the flag of the Ahnaf, we're probably even more so practically minded than the Shawafi and the Malik and the Hanabila, in that we were the what-ifers. We came up with scenarios which were so unheard of and tried to come up with an answer. So, and then there's this other element which I want to raise as well, is that as a community, we use, million-pound laboratory decisions to say that is permissible, when we see in the books of fiqh that it was a very rudimentary, empirical, observational science, that if you smell something or taste something or see something, then it's najis. But if you don't, then, go with it. We now say, oh, well, in that laboratory, we found no ppm of X in it. So that makes it haram. Well, if you took an apple off a tree or an orange off Morrison's car, you'll probably have as much in there. So that's another element we need to explore. But, we are where we are. We have these vaccines. We have got to be pragmatic and practical. Yes, from an ethical perspective, we will stand against any, abortions which are used as, or abortifetal, which is used as in a laboratory in this kind of scientific way to develop vaccines. We will stand against that now. We would have stood against that in the 1960s. However, we have these vaccines now in this current state. We apply the hukum on there. So I hope that answers your question.
Dr. Munir, for somebody who's started off our initial presentation, we've got 1 or 2, 3 questions for some of our viewers, more specifically in terms of the safety profile of the vaccine from Pfizer. So there is a discussion about fertility, and in terms of the fact that it can have an impact on fertility. There's also been questions about patients who are having anaphylactic shock. So they're basically they've died from an allergy to the vaccine. Now, how seriously should we take those kind of factors in our discussion regarding the safety approach to such vaccines?
Yeah, I mean, as we move along, there will be more and more information coming along onto these, I would call rare side effects, or something. Those are very minor. In terms of allergy, of course, people were included in the trial, but not with those specific allergies. And that's what I've been stating to the British government, is that they need to specifically identify what those allergies were, because you can't categorize all allergies into the same vulnerability while each allergy is its own. And it's very easy to identify that allergy. So as it stands, of course, this is a concern, but US approval did not consider that. They say that allergy is not one of those conditions that you need to look for to decide whether the vaccine is going to go or not. In terms of fertility, there is as per my understanding, there isn't any concern. However, one thing that we don't yet know is that whether the vaccine is as protective in pregnant women or not. And that is purely based on the fact that the pregnant women were not part of the phase 3 trial to be tested. So therefore, they cannot be certain whether the vaccine would perform the same way as it would perform in non-pregnant women. So just to be a bit out of cautiousness, therefore the recommendation is not to be used over there. And those trials are being set up, I know internally, from few of the vaccines in 18 and lower age children, as well as in the selected pregnant women, to see if there is any safety or health concerns about fertility or so.
Okay. We have been a number of different questions which have already been addressed by the panelists, Dr. Munir in particular, and some of the other people. And these are sort of repeated questions that have just been framed differently. So I'm not going to go back to those same questions. And I did mention right at the beginning about the difference between somebody who believes in conspiracy theories and somebody who believes in real conspiracies. So we do accept there are existent conspiracies that have happened in history. However, we need to differentiate between the two. So clearly there needs to be some kind of coherence in any kind of conspiracy. It shouldn't be just something which is completely contradictory or incoherent. So go back to the early part of this webinar, inshallah, and I've addressed the three sort of main features that would distinguish between the two. So I'm not going to entertain those discussions. I recognize that there's a lot of questions focused around this. Some people get very passionate about this discussion, and I sometimes question why they're so passionate about it. But anyway, other than that, I want to finish off because we've got a very short period of time. And I think we've addressed most of the questions, but there'll always be more questions as we go along. And inshallah, maybe in the future, we can have another webinar and discuss some of the more up-to-date questions. But I'm going to make reference to all four of our panelists. Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair for all the effort that you're putting into this, and some very informative information you've given us all. Is number one, I want you to, give some advice to our community. Like, we've got a sister here from China. We've got an international audience here. We've got a sister from China who's saying, okay, you guys are talking about the vaccines that are out there in the Western world. What about us folk in China? Yeah, and we live in a country which is quite anti-liberal. Works completely in the, so things become mandatory. You don't have a choice. So people like us, what should I do? What's the avenue of who should I go to? Who should I ask? So that's the first question. So I want a science answer and I want an Islamic answer to that, if there is an Islamic answer to that. And the second point is, what advice would you give to the governments of these different countries? So we have members and organizations from a number of different countries that are online as well, who represent certain health bodies or government bodies. What advice would you give them to gain trust within their community in relation to the vaccine uptake? And remember, vaccine hesitancy is a real thing, and it's completely acceptable that we should be hesitant about vaccines. Yeah, nobody's denying that. As long as we have the right information from the right sources and we feel comfortable with that, then alhamdulillah, then there's no issue. So on that basis, those two elements of advice. So if I can start off with yourself, Dr. Munir, first, from a scientist perspective, a Muslim scientist, okay, how would you sort of deal with these two groups of people?
The first advice I would really like to emphasize onto the fact that while we have the vaccine in the corner, don't assume that this is the end of the pandemic, because we have to vaccinate vast majority of the people to reach to the point where we will be able to say that now we are having a bit of handle on to this pandemic. For just putting into the perspective, I see some of the participants are from US. The population is 330 million, and they have vaccine supply for 6.4 million, which is equivalent to 3.2 million people. 3.2 million of 330 million is really a peanut. So there is no end in the near future to this pandemic until we really reach to the herd immunity. So until we don't have a full control on that, there is a definitely need to follow all those public health principles that have been set up to really have a bit of handle onto the pandemic. I think Shaykh Abu Eesa wanted to say something.
No, it wasn't. No, at all. I was just trying to refocus my camera.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry.
I thought you were trying to get rid of the flies.
Yeah. So that is the message for the public, and then there is a message for the government. Particularly, I want to pass some information to the developing countries. For me, problem is not the COVID-19 issue in the developed world, because they are wealthy. They already have infrastructure for transportation, for storage, for example, just putting into the perspective, in the UK, we have 70 million people, but the contracts that we have made for the vaccine, there are 355 million, which is 5 times more than our need. So I'm sure that everything is not going to be available all at once, but that is where we stand in the developed world. But problem is in the developing world, where governments are rather sleeping. They're not really thinking ahead of time that this is not a polio vaccine. This is not a TB vaccine. This vaccine will only go to the developing world when the whole developed world will already have satisfied their need. To put into the perspective, since I sit into the WHO expert panel in the COVAX facility, which is set up by the Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, WHO, and SAPI. These are the organizations that have been thinking about the developing world. We discussed that the only thing we can offer to the low and middle income countries by the end of 2021 is to provide 3% of their population. So vaccine doses for the 3% of their population for 67 countries. Those are low and middle income countries categorized according to the UN definition. So just assume that 3% of the doses are not sufficient even to vaccinate the frontline health worker in those developing countries. So this means there would be a long logistic challenge in coming months when the vaccine would be rolled out into the developed world. And then there would be a lot of issues in terms of who can travel to these countries who already have the vaccination, and then those countries cannot contract more vaccine. For example, since I'm originally from Pakistan government first put $100 million to buy the vaccine, and yesterday they increased it to $250 million to have enough assurance that the vaccine would be available. But the problem is not the money. The problem is the capability and scalability. For example, the Pfizer Moderna vaccine, they have only capability to produce 50 million doses for this year. So even if they have more money, they can't do it. So I think the message for the government is that think ahead. This is not a polio and TB vaccine. You will only get when everybody is satisfied, and that satisfaction will require another 2 years to go.
Jazakumullah khair. Some very useful advice for those of you who are from health bodies around the world. Yeah, inshallah, this is quite useful bit for you to know. Okay, right. So we're going to Shaykh Abu Eesa. Your last few words to those people who are in an environment where clearly things are a bit different to what it is in the Western world.
Yeah, you know, I actually went into quite a bit of detail. Maybe at that time I thought it was unnecessary. In the comments, it became clear why it was necessary on this particular issue. A lot of Muslims can take benefit from this question that's putting itself forward, and the response of international governments, and actually not even governments, different cultures to this pandemic, is also a reminder of how weak the Muslims have become in their aqidah and their understanding of actually what Islamic governance looks like. You see, at this moment in time, we're looking at the Chinese example of the sister in China as the exception, and as somehow as like we're the enlightened ones that should be teaching the world. Are you flipping kidding me? Has anybody looked at the number in America and in UK, the complete omnishambles cluster yani mess that we've made of it? The people who have sorted this out, who you can spend the whole day trying to blame them for causing it, but they're Chinese and their actions at the beginning, and they're making available of the genome, the genetic information, their absolute mad attack on the spread of it is actually what is probably going to give us the fighting chance of getting this sorted within 1 or 2 years. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. You look at the East, and the political response, the cultural response. There's none of this. Yeah, Wallah Adim, you look at the American, I mean, UK, they're a small percentage, but you look at the American kind of, what was it? Was it Florida or I don't know where it was, the news report the other day of they're in a meeting, a Zoom meeting like this, commissioners or whatever, making a decision on whether they're going, Idaho maybe it was, they're going to try to obligate the use of masks. Masks, okay? We're not talking taking flipping vaccine, masks, right? And to stay 2 meters away and social distance and all the rest of it. And while she is in the meeting, her kid is calling her on the phone, right? The clip's gone viral. And the kid's calling, she's ignoring it. Then she picks up, she puts herself on mute, and the kid goes, there's 500 people outside the house trying to break in. Yeah, and you know, you will not, we will not comply. We will not comply. This is now, you know, this stupidity, this worship of the self that nobody can tell me what to do, right? Which is the idea and the vanguard of the liberal West, has now entered into the hearts and minds of Muslims. What do we have to do with this stupidity, this fake concept that we are in control of these things? And governments, and even governments that rule by kufr, right? That remind us actually of authoritative control, which is what Islamic control is. There's none of this, you do what you want and you say what you want and you wear what you want and you think what you want. This idea now has affected our own aqidah. So we're now starting to now bring our own biases into areas which actually, if you really wanted to ask what the Islamic ruling is, you have a heart attack. So don't ask about things that you don't want to hear the answer to. You know what I'm trying to say? Don't ask this question, because we're going to say that actually the whole world messed up and only the Chinese got it right, who are banning and putting a lockdown for 7 months. But you don't want to hear about a lockdown for 7 months. So, you know, when people say that people are saying this, I don't care about people. Respect to Dr. Aasim, by the way, who said, listen, I've had enough of people just sitting on the fence. We should be recommending things. I'll go further and I'll say, not on the issue of medicine, I'll say enough of the people just chatting rubbish. Wallahi, the other day I gave a lecture on this, and in the comments someone said that, how can we trust him? He's a health professional. Bloody hell, what happened to, yani, what did I do? Health professional, yani, that's now an attack on a person. One person said, how dare you recommend a vaccine that has that is saying that it cannot be used in shouldn't be used in pregnant women because we haven't done tests. I said, well, don't ask about the rest of medication then, because you honestly think that medicines are tested on pregnant women. You know, you got people who are just putting out their own kind of fears, their own ignorance, and people are listening. People have just got to remember, Muslims, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, as Allah says in the Quran, فَتَثَبَّتُوا, as Allah says in the Qira'ah. Yani, there is a requirement upon Muslims to clarify what people are saying, to establish the proof of what people say. Not everything that everyone says is to be just judged by your mind. We have Islamic principles. Anyway, that's enough to be said on that.
Mufti Amjad, your opportunity to address these individuals in these remote parts of the world, and also some kind of advice to health bodies, you know, the people who are on the front line are trying to go out and give these vaccinations, and they need some kind of engagement program to get some sense of trust amongst people. What kind of advice would you give somebody who's come from, you know, a number of different backgrounds?
I'm glad you reminded me of the question, because after Sheikh's bayan, I completely forgot what the question was. I forgot completely what I was actually going to be asked. I hope he doesn't say, what's your views? Because I wouldn't know what to say after that.
And I picked that up as well, so that's why.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that little tip. If I can focus, I don't get much out of Bradford, so if I can just focus on more local rather than international affairs, and just to cite an example, Bradford was looking at carrying out some trials on this vaccination, and they only managed to get about 500 people, and out of the 500 there was only about 14, 15 from the BAME community. And out of the 14, 15 from the BAME community, I think there's about 6 people who had so-called Muslim names. So they were kind of kicking up a bit fuss that, you know, I wouldn't say that, you know, there was any level of prejudice, but they were sort of saying, why aren't the Muslim community coming forward, whatever. And you can see how certain members of the wider community can start, you know, with all their, or Muslims don't necessarily follow rules, they don't care, and all the rest of it kind of being spun into that. However, it wasn't as sinister as that. What it was basically was no communication at all, hardly anything, you know. So when someone spoke to me and they rang me up and I said, look, I don't even know about it. you know, and I know what goes down in Leeds Road and whatever else. So if I don't know about it, I don't think you've got much chance of anybody else knowing about it. So it was only when we started having conversations and then we ran a similar Zoom thing like this. And I think then the following week, it went to Bradford being the second highest in the UK. Now, as I said, I'm not necessarily, you know, condoning whether someone takes it or doesn't take it. But my point is, and I've said this from the beginning, is that we need to give informed choices to people. They need to understand the repercussions of certain things. They need to understand what will happen if they don't take it. And they also need to understand what the Sharia says, so that people aren't blindly blaming the Sharia for sort of saying that, you know, we're not permitted to take this, because that was some of the feedback that we were getting from the health professionals, that many people are saying it's impermissible for me to take this. So people are kind of just kind of guessing at things as well. So you know, I think that enlightenment, and that's essential, that we continue this kind of conversation. But health bodies, health authorities, local councils, government bodies need to engage with those communities which it claims they're serving. So if it's serving the BAME communities, if it feels the BAME community are being adversely affected by this more than anybody else, then it doesn't make sense if you're not engaging with them, because who are you engaging with? And on the last point, you know, we can see lots of questions and debates going on as I'm watching this streamline on the Zoom webinar chat, where everybody's kind of giving their own opinions. And that comes back to the last point, is that sometimes we ask questions, and then when we're given a Sharia response, nobody wants to act upon it. Yeah. So sometimes people will say, so, you know, a question comes up that, Mufti Sahib, is it permissible to pray Salah with gaps in it? Well, if I say to you it's impermissible, what are you going to do? You know, so it's this kind of mindset that we are trying to navigate in waters which we've never been in before. We're trying to navigate and maintain as much of our faith and identity as we possibly can. So it doesn't help by, you know, kind of posing questions and issues, which is like ulama thought, well, that's a good question, isn't it? How come no one else thought about that? So, you know, I think there's got to be a fair bit of respect that's offered to both the health experts and those who are leading us in terms of our Sharia. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Dr. Aasim Padela, I finally leave it with you. For somebody who is quite heavily engaged with health, governing bodies and people like that, I thought you might be able to give us some more relevant, appropriate advice, specifically with your experience to these organizations, because this is your expert area.
Well, Allah alam what I'm expert in, I don't quite know, but I would say two things just to address, because we're over time. I think everything that happens to us is not is there for a purpose, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. And I reminded in the end, you said, what is the guidance to those polities who might not be in UK, US, wherever else it is? Well, the same applies to all of us, right? The Allah, you know, if you protect, not protect, but if you're mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, that you should know that He's the one who's going to benefit you, and He's going to one that's going to harm. There's nothing that can happen without His leave, right? So we should, this entire and every aspect of our life is about that. We should need to reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trust in Him, take the asbab where we can, but always know that He is the one who brings benefit, and He's the one who brings, you know, and can protect us from harm. So that's my advice. And if authorities or others are saying things, your trusted advisors are, you know, take what they say, make your own istikhara, trust your heart, make dua that Allah will open doors for you for khair. And as far as this trust business, I appreciate what Mufti Amjad is saying. I think the responsibility again comes to us. I don't want to talk about other people. Yes, trust must be earned. Yes, as researchers, we need to be going and connecting with those underprivileged and marginalized communities, right? There need to be outreach, but it's also on us that we should be invested in the benefit of society. I'm not saying go do research trials. I'm saying that you should be going to the hospital systems and the healthcare authorities and asking them about what is going on, how can I participate, how can I help connect you to marginalized communities, because we have to be responsible citizens as well. And I think some of that problem is our own. We are not responsible citizens. You can see what happens in masajid parking lots. We're not responsible citizens, and then we claim someone's not doing something for us. But what are we doing? What are we doing to get involved and help? And as I said in the chat box, I think that we only, you know, one of the opinions around people are upset about people saying this is haram, that's haram. But we're in this situation because we shirked our own responsibilities. We have both ulama and an. And unless we take responsibility, there's no way out of it. So I am trying to teach my own children, my students, be responsible to yourself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and community. And inshallah, I'll be khair in it. But that's our only hope, that we have to be responsible for ourselves and our environment, and not leave it to others to take care of us. So Jazakallah khair for this panel.
Just to give my sort of perspective on somebody who's worked with health bodies and been part of a health body sort of setup with the Bradford City CCG, various other things. My advice to sort of people who are involved in dealing with certain vaccination programs and various other things and trying to get some kind of, or dealing with the issue of vaccination hesitancy, which clearly is real and it should be, you know, is number one, you need to gain the trust of the people. And the only way you're going to gain the trust of the people is be honest. If you are honest, then you will slowly see that the people will begin to trust. Now, there are individuals who feel that there is an underlying conspiracy to everything, and that's something that will always exist. It's not something that's going to go away overnight. Especially, we know that any kind of idea around these conspiracy ideas, they tend to arise when they see things happening on a larger scale. So if you see things happening on a much larger scale, then it's inevitable that's only human behavior that we're going to behave in that sort of way. But you just have to earn the trust of the people, and you have to make sure that the information you give them is honest and truthful. Don't try to sell something like you're selling a product, you know, over a counter, and you use any kind of tactic to sell this. Be just honest and let people make that decision themselves. And that's what we hope that we have been doing, inshallah, today. I know there are individuals, I know personal individuals who will be saying, Dr. Saab, you've been, you know, really putting a slant to this whole thing. You know, you're trying to promote the idea of vaccinations. I know people are going to talk about that. But, you know, at the end of the day, what's really, really important is we are all accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know. So at the end of the day, if I have done anything wrong, or I have had my own personal bias, I'm a GP, okay, somebody from the medical field. I have seen individuals die from COVID, and I really mean that, yeah. My own father passed away because of it. So I am somebody who's very, you know, but yet I will take all my emotions to one side, and I will still be hesitant about vaccinations, okay? But I'm going to use my information from reliable sources. So I will approach ulama who have good understanding of the fiqh related to this particular area, which I would want them to also have some kind of science background or some kind of understanding of science. Okay, not just general ulama. I'm looking at people, ulama, who have an expertise in this particular area, more so. And the one really important quality is that they have taqwa and they are adil. Now, if that is all that is required, and that is all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands of us, that we look for those people who are trustworthy, have taqwa, who are adil, and then you rely on them. Because you are not an expert. You can't go out looking, searching. Unfortunately, we have people who have absolutely no expertise in this area. And they are firing away with all these WhatsApp messages and all these social media messages all over the place and coming out with all sorts of wonderful theories. In fact, I just recently joined a Telegram group of one person who's just throwing everything he possibly can against vaccinations. And it's an interesting group. And you know, it's a group that you can't engage with because it's only one-sided message that he can send. But wallahi, you know, this guy needs lining up and shooting. You know, he's really deceiving the community. You know, honestly, there is something where you have an extreme, and there's something where you are, you know, a bit, you know, conscious about really what reality is. So let's be real about this, okay? And let's be frank about these issues. So, you know, we need to really think about this carefully. This is not a small issue. It's a very real issue. It's a serious issue. Hopefully, if there's anything that we've done, is we're not here slanted to one end and saying vaccinations, go ahead without question. Question them. Have that element of hesitancy, but be rightly informed and make the right choices. And then we leave everything else to Allah. Take the sabab, and then we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have tawakkul in Allah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cure us of these waba and these illnesses around us. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to be able to act on what's been said. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also bring shifa kamila to our communities from all sorts of illnesses, because it's not just COVID. There are many other illnesses in our community. Unfortunately, we are at the receiving end of most of them. So inshallah, we make dua, we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finally and foremost, because Allah is in control of everything. We leave at that point. I want to thank our panelists immensely for their contributions. I know they're doing immense work out there in the community. They don't just worry about COVID. There are many other things to worry about. But inshallah, this is a very important area. So we've addressed this through Al-Balagh webinar series, inshallah. Hopefully you can all understand our predicament here. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.